On February 19, 1998, two soldiers, Mark and Zane Keller, were assigned to a mission that started like every other. But this one turned into something everyone fears, a mission that never ends. They were part of a 6-man recon unit stationed in the Khyber Range, a place so cold and steep even the winds sounded lost. Their objective was simple on paper: escort a supply convoy through a narrow mountain pass, confirm delivery, and return before the storm hit. Routine. Always routine. Until it isn't. By 0430, the camp was alive with motion. Diesel engines coughing in the dark, radios hissing with short bursts of chatter. Mark checked his weapon for the third time, the habit of a man who trusted steel more than luck. Zane sat on an ammo crate, cigarette glowing faintly against the snow. He wasn't saying much, just staring at the horizon where the sky bled pale blue over black rock. "Storm's moving faster than forecast," one of the drivers muttered. Nobody answered. They all knew it didn't matter. Orders were orders. They rolled out at 0500, 3 trucks, 1 Humvee, and 2 motorcycles running scout. The tires grinding ice, the air smelled of fuel, frost, and nerves. Mark kept glancing at his wrist GPS, connection flickering, mountains blocking signal. Zane followed the map taped to his dashboard, tracing their route with a gloved finger. By 9 o'clock, the first radio blackout hit. Static swallowed half the team's chatter. Command told them to keep moving, line of sight intact. No one argued. At 10:32, the lead truck slowed. Something glinted on the road ahead. Metal fragments, charred and twisted. They stopped. Mark climbed down, boots sinking into fresh snow. Burnt steel. Vehicle remains, maybe a week old. Not theirs. Not friendly either. The mountains around them went dead silent. Even the wind paused. Zane knelt beside a track half buried in ice. Boot print. Small. Shallow. Too recent. Locals? Mark didn't answer. He was looking up at the ridgeline, dark shapes half hidden in fog. They moved again, slower now. Nobody spoke. The pass narrowed, cliffs closing in like jaws. The light faded to gray. By 1400, the snow turned to a white curtain. Visibility dropped to nothing. The last voice over comms was the driver of Truck 2. "Visibility gone. Following your taillights. Keep..." Then static. At 1445, the storm hit full force. The world vanished. The next check-in never came. Hours later, the base received one broken transmission. Riley's voice. Faint. Half drowned by wind. "Convoy compromised. Something. Not. Then silence. When the weather cleared 2 days later, search teams reached the pass. All 3 trucks were there, burned. Cabins melted into the ice. Blood frozen on the seats. No bodies. Only Mark's helmet, cracked clean through. And Zane's dog tag, wrapped around a branch like someone tied it there on purpose. The official report called it an ambush, classified, then buried. Case closed. But 3 years later, on a night patrol 50 miles north, another unit picked up a distress beacon. Faint. Erratic. Decades out of sync. The code matched an ID, long retired. Rains. M. Transmission lasted 12 seconds. Then, nothing. 3 weeks after the disappearance, the mountain still hadn't given anything back. The official reports said avalanche, extreme weather, low visibility, nature's way of erasing mistakes. But the men who had served with Mark and Zane didn't buy that. You don't lose 2 trained soldiers and 3 armored vehicles to snow. Not without a trace. The command moved on, boxed up the files, and transferred anyone who asked too many questions. But rumors lingered around the base like smoke that wouldn't clear. The White Range earned its name for a reason. Even in satellite images, it looked lifeless, a stretch of serrated ice that broke radios and swallowed drones. The kind of terrain where compasses spun uselessly and GPS went blind. Locals said the place was cursed. They told stories about voices in the snow and old war bunkers that still breathed at night. The army didn't care about curses. They cared about logistics. But everyone who went there came back quieter. Some didn't come back at all. Captain Ward, who had commanded the mission, carried the guilt like a stone in his pocket. Every night for months he replayed the last radio ping in his head. Static, then a voice he could barely recognize, muffled by the wind. There had been something in the tone that didn't sound like fear. It sounded like confusion, like Mark was trying to describe something he didn't understand. Ward filed his report, followed orders, and said nothing. But silence doesn't erase a sound once it gets inside you. By summer, the case was old news. Command shifted focus to new operations, new losses. But when snow melted around the lower ridge that July, a shepherd found something. A torn piece of canvas, Army issue, with faded serial numbers that matched one of the missing vehicles. It had been half buried in rock, torn clean through like by machinery or claws. They said it could have drifted there in the avalanche, but Ward requested a recovery detail anyway. He went himself. The coordinates led them to a narrow crevice between two ridges. Wind funneled through like a scream. Inside, the air stank of rust and cold, the snow packed tight as cement. They dug for hours, picks clanging against something hollow. When they finally cleared it, they realized it wasn't a truck at all. It was a tunnel. Reinforced walls, concrete edges hidden under decades of frost. Someone had built it long before the war. Ward sent one man in with a headlamp. 10 minutes later, he called for backup. What they found inside didn't fit any report. The tunnel ran 50 meters down before opening into a chamber. Rusted cots, burned equipment, faded American insignia painted on one wall. But it wasn't the age of the place that unsettled them. It was what looked recent. Empty food pouches, modern field rations, a cracked canteen with Zane Keller's initials carved in the base, and above one of the concrete pillars, something scratched into the surface. 18 days. The marks were fresh, the edges still white against the gray. Ward stood there for a long time, the beam of his flashlight shaking slightly. The cold seemed to breathe against his face. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller than the wind. He ordered the tunnel sealed, sent his men back, and wrote in his report that the site had been cleared and contained no evidence of personnel remains. The file was closed again. But he didn't seal the tunnel. He marked it privately on his own map and left a small black X in his notebook. That night, back at camp, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scratches on the wall and the faint outline of something else beneath them too shallow to read. It looked like someone had started to write a word, but never finished. The next morning, Ward's request for another search was denied. Too much risk, no strategic value. Command ordered him back to base. He obeyed, at least officially. But 2 days later, under heavy fog, he drove back to the ridge alone. The snow had filled the tracks again. The mountain looked untouched, like it had never known them. But when he reached the crevice, he found something he hadn't seen before. A trail of faint footprints leading away from the tunnel mouth. They weren't animal, too straight, too human. They stopped abruptly near the edge of a cliff, as if the person who made them had simply vanished. He crouched there for a long time, breath shaking in the cold, looking down into the valley below where the wind tore through the trees. He knew what he would write in his journal later that night, even before he left. Still missing, but not gone. By late autumn, the story of Mark Rains and Zane Keller had become little more than a rumor, the kind soldiers told each other over bad coffee when the wind howled too hard against the tin roofs. But for Captain Ward, it hadn't ended. The discovery in the tunnel refused to leave him. He'd stopped reporting his private trips to the ridge, stopped pretending he was just following orders. Every few weeks he went back, each time finding something new the mountain decided to give up. The second time, it was a helmet, Zane's, cracked down the middle, half frozen into the dirt. The next, a torn notebook cover with only one legible word on it, alive. Ward never sent any of it to command. He knew how that would end. A classified drawer, a file labeled unverified, another silence. Winter came early that year. The valley went white again, swallowing everything. Ward knew this would be his last chance before the season locked the range for good. He went up alone, one snowcat, one rifle, one lantern. No convoy this time, no report to file. The tunnel entrance was nearly gone, packed under 6 feet of snow. He dug until his hands bled through the gloves. The deeper he went, the stronger the smell became. Cold metal, ash, something faintly human. When he finally crawled inside, the air was dry and heavy. His flashlight beam caught the same walls as before, the same scratches, but there were more now. Dozens more, hundreds, freshly carved, some faint, some deep enough to splinter the concrete. He counted them without meaning to, then stopped halfway through. Someone had started marking time again. His heart began to hammer, slow and heavy. The air felt wrong, not stale like before, but used, as if someone had been breathing there not long ago. Near the corner, his light caught something he hadn't seen last time. A sleeping bag, faded but still upright, the fabric crusted with frost. Beside it, a tin can half filled with melted snow. He moved closer and found a mark drawn into the floor, crude and deliberate, an arrow pointing toward the back wall. He followed it. The beam cut across the far side of the chamber and landed on a narrow passage he hadn't noticed before, half sealed by ice. It looked recent, carved open by hand. He hesitated. The wind outside groaned through the tunnel mouth, low and constant like something alive. Ward pressed forward, shoulders brushing cold rock. The passage went down maybe 10 feet before opening into a smaller room. The walls there were smooth, newer. Someone had tried to paint over the concrete with black soot, but through the faint light, the writing underneath still showed through. "We are not dead." 3 words, uneven, carved into the wall so deep his fingers caught the grooves. He stared at it until his flashlight began to fade, then turned toward the floor. There were 2 army tags lying there, side by side. Rains. Keller. They were wrapped in wire, rusted, and coated with something dark that wasn't ice. The metal still warm from touch. He stumbled back, almost dropping the light. His breathing grew fast, shallow. It was impossible. The last report had said the beacon signal from Raines's ID had gone dead years ago. He crouched down again, staring at the tags, and that's when he noticed the boot prints. Small, precise, half frozen, leading out of the passage and back toward the tunnel mouth. He turned off his light and listened. Nothing but the sound of water dripping from the ceiling. Still, he felt it, that quiet certainty that he wasn't alone. He left everything as it was, climbed out of the tunnel, and drove down the mountain before sunrise. The snowstorm hit halfway through his descent, white swallowing the road until there was no horizon, no direction. He drove blind, barely breathing, the words still burning in his head. When he reached base at dawn, he didn't file a report. He didn't tell anyone. He went straight to the storage hangar where the recovered evidence was kept and locked himself inside. There he laid out what he had taken from the ridge, the notebook cover, the tags, a strip of fabric with Raines's name still legible. All of it lined up neatly on the table. The light flickered above him. The room smelled of metal and damp canvas. He opened his field log, turned to a blank page, and wrote 1 sentence. Someone survived. Then under it another. Someone else doesn't want us to know. He closed the book and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The wind outside sounded like the mountains again, endless, hollow, and moving toward something. He knew this wasn't over. He knew he'd have to go back, and this time he wasn't sure he wanted to know what he'd find. 2 weeks passed before Captain Ward went back. He told no one, not command, not even the logistics officer who noticed his requisition for extra rations. He said it was for a training op. It wasn't. He knew he was being reckless, maybe obsessed, but the thought of those scratches, fresh, deliberate, kept him awake every night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words carved into the wall. "We are not dead." He drove out before dawn, the truck's engine struggling against the cold. The sky over the Kunar Range was pale gray, streaked with the kind of light that made the world look empty. Snow covered everything, the roads, the markers, the places where men once walked. Ward barely recognized the trail. By the time he reached the ridge, the sun had vanished behind a wall of clouds. The tunnel mouth was gone again, sealed by drifted snow. He dug until his arms shook, until he found the hollow space beneath. He crawled inside, the same smell of metal and damp stone greeting him. But something had changed. The air was colder, still, but heavy, as if holding its breath. He turned his light on. The chamber was almost the same as before, except the writing on the wall, the one that had said, "We are not dead," was crossed out. A single new word had been etched over it. "You are." The letters were fresh, wet at the edges where the ice hadn't formed yet. Ward froze, the light trembling in his hand. He didn't move for a long time. Every instinct screamed to leave, to back away, to go back to the world of reports and radio chatter where things made sense. But he didn't. He stepped closer. That's when he saw them. 2 figures near the back, standing in the half-dark, still, silent. Shapes barely human in the dim light. He called out, his voice breaking in the cold. No answer. He took another step, light shaking across the walls. They were uniforms. 2 sets, hanging upright. Helmets still on, faces hidden behind shattered visors. Frost had fused them into the wall, like statues of what had once been men. The tags on their chests were dull but visible. Rains, Keller. Ward stared at them, unable to breathe. He reached out to touch the nearest shoulder, and the fabric gave way. It wasn't frozen solid. It was soft. The material peeled beneath his glove, revealing skin underneath, pale and thin as paper. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the light. The thing that had once been Zane Keller shifted slightly, like the air itself had moved through it. From somewhere behind the wall came a faint sound, not mechanical, not human exactly, a low, steady pulse, like breathing slowed to a crawl. Ward turned toward the sound. The floor dipped into another short passage, one he hadn't seen before. He hesitated, heart hammering, then crawled through. At the end was a small chamber. A generator sat in the corner, half buried under frost, still humming faintly. Cables ran from it into the wall. And on that wall, scratched beneath the frost, was a line of writing he could barely read through the beam of his flashlight. "They made us stay awake." His hand went numb. The letters trailed downward, shaky and uneven, ending in a smear of something dark. Beneath them, a metal door lay half open, the edges rimed with ice. Ward knelt, pulling it wider. Inside were bunks. Old, rusted, but disturbed. Blankets shoved aside, cups frozen to tables, footprints leading in circles. He moved deeper, light flickering. On the last bunk, a photograph was pinned to the wall. 2 men in uniform, one with a cigarette in his mouth, both smiling. Mark Rains and Zane Keller. Below the photo, one final sentence scratched into the wall. "We thought help would come." Ward didn't remember leaving. Not the climb out, not the drive down, only the silence that followed. The kind that stays with you. He returned to base at dawn, frost still clinging to his sleeves. He locked himself in his quarters, turned on the recorder, and spoke for 6 minutes. His voice quiet, flat,
almost detached. He detailed what he saw, the tunnels, the words, the bodies. He ended with one line. "If anyone hears this, don't go looking." He sent the file through a private frequency, the same one Rains had used for field updates. Then he sat back and waited for the knock that would come. Command? Or maybe something else entirely. But the knock never came. A week later, a patrol went up to the ridge. They found the tunnel sealed again, no trace of footprints or vehicles, just an empty stretch of snow. The chamber was gone. Collapsed, maybe? Or something made sure it disappeared. Captain Ward's truck was found parked near the edge of the trail. Engine cold. Door open. No sign of him. On the passenger seat lay his notebook. One line written across the last page. February 19th, 2021,